This is the third and last in our Food for Body, Mind, and Spirit series. And we have been, the adult sessions have been entitled Love Over Hate. We're so glad you're here. Who has been here for at least one of the previous 2 weeks? Okay, so it's a group that's oriented to what we're doing. 2 weeks ago, we showed a movie called Waking in Oak Creek, and it was documenting the tragedy that happened in August of 2012 at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek. A man came in, a white supremacist, and murdered 6 of the temple worshipers and wounded a police officer. And out of that experience, the people of Oak Creek bonded together. Some wonderful things have come out of the tragedy. And so we watched that movie. And then last week, we had Patrick Rickards, who is now the executive director of Life After Hate. It's a Milwaukee-based organization. And Patrick spoke to us about how people who are involved in right-wing supremacist movement, how, so a little bit about what brings them into that movement and the process of trying to bring them out of the movement. And so we do have a copy of his audio talk, and I'd be happy to send it to you if it's unlisted on our website, but if you'd like a copy, I can just send me an email and I'll send it to you. I am Julia Hollister. My husband Jim and I have been pastors of this church for quite a long time, and we are glad that you're here. And tonight, sort of the culmination, we have Pardeep Kaleka. Is that how you say it?
Yep, you got it.
Pretty close? Good, good.
You got it, that's perfect.
Good. Pardeep is also a child of that congregation. Do you think of yourselves as a child?
Oh, sure, I would love to.
Yeah, a child of God. A child of the Sikh temple. His father was the temple leader on that day and during that time, and his father was killed on that day. And so out of that experience, Pardeep has probably shifted, I would say it's shifted your focus a bit.
Yeah, for
and now is very much involved in helping to educate and to help heal. He's written a book, Gift of Our Wounds, with Arno McAllis.
You got it, yep.
And came up from Carroll College today, right? Is that where you were? Yeah.
I did, yeah.
So I'll let him talk more, but he has quite a history with law enforcement and counseling and teaching, and let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Julia, and thank you, everyone. Yeah, a lot of times my daughter, she asked this question the other day. She's a senior now, and I think she got accepted to UW-Madison, so it's all good news for us. Yeah, she was trying really hard, but she's like, Dad, it's hard for me to describe what you do. And then my wife was like, yeah, it's really hard for me to describe what you do as well. And it becomes very hard for anyone. So I have worn a lot of hats. I was formerly, once I graduated from Marquette, I was formerly a police officer in the city of Milwaukee. I did that for about 5 years, District 7, Squad 70. So my patrol area, if you're familiar with Milwaukee, was the inner city of Milwaukee from 16th to 27th. Chambers, Burleigh, Auer, a really, really difficult place to police. I spent about 5 years there. And then I became an educator in the city of Milwaukee. I started working with at-risk high school youth. And so many of these students, if you're familiar with kind of the education process, had a lot of what's known as IEPs, individualized education sort of programming. And many of them were behind, as far as like grades according to, what MPS wanted them to be. And it was tasked upon us to address their address their grades, address their attendance, and oftentimes it was addressing sort of their social emotional needs. And there was obviously a policing there, and then teaching in that same neighborhood. You got to know that neighborhood very intimately, and there was just a lot of difficulties that these students were going through. And so I'm going to speak from that perspective. After the shooting happened, I was kind of, I don't know if it's catapulted, but that's the only word I can think of right now to say, and I think that sometimes when difficult times happen to us, and none of us wants to have anything difficult happen to the ones that we love. And I pray to God that nothing like this ever impacts anyone in here. But thinking about that and thinking about that day and what happened that day and what happened in the aftermath, it did catapult you into a place where I felt like God was saying, Pardeep, you have done a lot, and I get that you're inspired by public service. I get this is the way that you're wired and what you feel like you want to do for the rest of your life. And I was really, this is the summer of 2012, really content on just teaching my entire life. I have the utmost respect for police officers. I have the utmost respect for educators. I have the utmost respect for people that dedicate their lives to making a better social fabric for those that will come behind us. It is very, very self-sacrificing, right? You sacrifice your own family oftentimes. So you give a lot. And sometimes you may not feel like you're getting as much in. And so it does become important for us to gather and congregate together. And we were just talking about kind of congregating even remotely. But I think there's a special intimacy in all of us coming together and praying as what we would call a sangat, and maybe you would call a congregation, a physical in presence congregation where you can kind of feel, right? You can kind of hear, you can kind of see, it's an in-person experience. And when that happened, it felt like God was kind of saying to us, thank you for what you do, but you're not doing enough. You're not doing enough. And I don't think that we share a creator who says that in so many words, but sometimes, I was just thinking about as we were walking in, and we're thinking about love over hate. And thinking about the way that we walk in our journey of life. And the question that kept coming up over the years was, are we as a society walking with faith, or are we walking with sight? And a lot of times when I work with some of these young men, so I do a lot of the same work of de-radicalizing. Some people will call it deprogramming. I really just think about it as I'm helping to bring this person back to a healthy sense of self and connection. And a lot of times I will utilize the religious, faith, spiritual component and what it feels like towards them. Now, as this field is emerging, a lot of times people are like, how do you measure success, Pardeep? Like, what are the qualitative and quantitative measurements of success? The qualitative, I can say, well, you know what, anecdotally, I can say when a mom feels like her young one is lost and she doesn't recognize him anymore because hate has become such a big part of his life. And I'm using his because almost every one of my clients is a he. Then I'm not saying this doesn't impact women, girls, but most of my clients are he's. But anecdotally I can say, you know what, I know your son. I have faith that that same son that you remember when he was 1, when he was crawling, right, when he was learning how to walk, when he spoke his first words, and they usually were, Mom, Dad, I don't know, like I need something, right? I promise you that that person is still there, whether you can see him or not. And a lot of times they're in a place where the child is now 18 years old, 19 years old, 20 years old, sometimes 25 years old. They're like, I don't see him at all. I'm like, let's think back. Let's revisit what you see with your sight and what you know is actually there with your faith. Because if we're just going to visualize the society by sight, right? Our sight, even if you think about it, I'm going to talk with a lot of sort of mental health language, but I won't make it very clinical, right? But if you think about sort of the neurology of the brain is right here. Your sight is right here, right? And so sometimes what we see ends up being perceived by our perceptions in our brain. And this supercomputer that we have takes a lot of stimuli and puts it together and condenses it for us. Because if we were like mindful about everything, I would have to say, okay, I see, my man in the red shirt. I see her, she's wearing blue sweatshirt. I see that, I see the young man over there. I see like all of this stuff but what also happens is when we condense a whole bunch of stimuli into like what is digestible to us, what we usually perceive is what we're used to perceiving. So there's things called confirmation bias and all these other things. And the more pain that somebody goes through, a lot of times their sight becomes impaired by the pain, the lens of that pain. Right? And so I ask families, give me this time just to imagine, just to have courage, have faith, to not be tainted by that lens of sight. Sight is great, right? But sometimes what we want to do is say, hey, here's what I see, and here's what you should see. So we become insistent on that sight. But what we're really insisting on is pain, right? Pain, trauma, like whatever turmoil. Right? So for me, when that happened that day, I was in this country at that time, for a very long time. And I've always kind of considered myself kind of a bridge. I wasn't really old enough in sort of our people's ancestry here to be part of kind of like the first ones that came over and the older generation. That would be my parents and some of their loved ones. And when I came over, we were 6 years old. My brother and I came over. And so I was born in India, but I was raised in America. Right? And I was always kind of challenged by that, right? And part of it was I didn't really know who I was. I was like, who am I? Who am I? And I think that's the question that we always kind of ask ourselves as we're growing up. Who am I? Because a lot of times we don't feel enough of something to really call ourselves that. We sometimes struggle with uncertainty of self, right? And so my I am not enough was, I didn't feel like I was, and at that time, the neighborhood that I grew up in was mostly black, brown, and white. So Polish, German, South Side Milwaukee, few people were black, a few people were Latino, brown. So I knew that I wasn't, white enough to be white. Right? I didn't feel American enough to be American. I didn't feel black enough to be black. And the brown people that I knew were a different type of brown, so I didn't really even feel brown enough to be brown. Strange part was, I didn't feel I didn't even feel Indian enough to be Indian. Right? Now that's like, and I know that everyone in here has had that feeling. I am not enough of this to call myself this. And we wrestle with those feelings that come with it. And hopefully, when we think about working with some of these young men who are struggling with identity development, right? We think about identity, purpose, and belonging. And maybe Patrick talked about that a little bit, of how do you give people a healthy identity, purpose, and belonging. For me, very, very fortunate to be, to kind of be in a place where, okay, I'm not black enough to be black, I'm not white enough to be white, I'm not American enough to be American, I'm not Indian enough to be even Indian. So let me discover Pardeep and discover who you uniquely are. And so that was the journey. And as 2012 happened, as that summer of August of 2012 happened, and for you, do we have any educators in here? Okay, a lot of educators, or former educators. Okay. So, for educators, August is that time of great anticipation and anxiety because we're about to go back to school soon. So we're trying to enjoy those last days of summer. But I remember just kind of thinking about, I'm on the way to the temple. I'm like, man, this is just beautiful. It's beautiful outside. I felt good. I felt like, in a way, we had achieved what we wanted to achieve to kind of have this American dream be realized. Right? I didn't know it at that time that I was kind of reflecting on that and what would happen in the minutes to follow. And what happened in the minutes to follow was the deadliest hate crime committed in nearly 50 years by an affiliated white supremacist. Now, since then, we've had more and more and more of it. But at that time, in 2012, the commonality of what we call commonly today as targeted violence, hate-based targeted violence, yes, sadly, it has a name, it has a category, it has a study, it has a field. There's a whole almost industry now developing to try to prevent those types of incidents. But at that time, and this is 2012, the politics in the country are really, really ramped up. They're really, really high. This was, who was running against, I believe it was McCain-Obama election. So the politics are really, really ramped up. And when politics ramp up, and I'm not saying this to scare anybody in here, okay? But you have to be vigilant. You have to be vigilant. You have to have some protocols. You have to know who is coming in and who's going out. You need to have some ushers at the door. You need to have a set of protocols that says, hey, if a person, we don't need to discriminate, but if a person like Pardeep walks in, right, and I'm new to the congregation, and now I'm walking in and you don't recognize me, have a set of protocols that are written down that says, hey, here's what we do with people who are new to the congregation. Okay? You just have to be vigilant. These are not the days to say, well, you know what, everybody is welcome. Okay? Everybody is welcome. But have a set of protocols so that when Pardeep says, hey, why did you discriminate against me? Am I the only brown guy in here? You can say, no, we do that with everybody. Cool? With that said, we still have to move forward, right? With faith, with courage, with love. And for us, that was very, very difficult. And when that happened, there's a couple scary days in everyone's life. How many of y'all are married? Okay, so some of y'all have gone through that scary day. Okay. The other scary day was honestly the first time that I walked back into the temple for the first time. And why I was scared, I was more scared that day than I was at my marriage. Why I was more scared that day was, now here was a terrorist who wanted to instill fear, who wanted to intimidate, who just wanted people to question their existence of, you're not enough. You're not American enough. You're not valuable enough. Right? This person didn't only tell us that, he took it upon himself to say, you know what? Not only are you not welcomed in this country, you're not welcomed on the face of this earth, because I'm going to take it upon myself to take you out. Right? That's a unique, special, right, type of hate to make you question your existence. And the first time that I walked back into the temple, I saw the faces of children. And one of the first things that kind of happened, I remember this, I recollect this vividly, but I'm walking in expecting there to be all kinds of like things, and people ran up to me and they're like, Pardeep. Hey, I'm like, oh, okay, what are you, like, I'm thinking in my head, what are you so excited about? They're like, we cleaned up all the blood off of the carpets. We took out all of the bullet holes out of the drywall. We left this particular one right here, right? But all of it's clean. And I'm not the type to kind of say, well, why? Do you think that heals everything? If we just forget about the past, if we just move forward, if we just say, you know what, we're here today, a week after the shooting, and nothing is like, we don't learn from history, right? But I was trying to be nice as well. So I'm gonna say, okay, thank you so much. And then all of a sudden I started to hear these conversations of young ones, right? And I hear them, they're in Punjabi, they're in different languages, and like you can hear that, like, why do they hate us? Right? Why did they do this? Are we not enough? Like, what did we do wrong? And for me, I've always believed, I believe in, like a lot of people, but I always believe in our youth, right? I always feel like they're the ones that are going to tell us what the future is going to look like. And I'm a big believer in just immigrants, people that come here are given a chance. I was once that same 6-year-old child. And all I wanted to do, I didn't want to be rich. I didn't want to be wealthy. I didn't want to be an investment. I could care less about any of that stuff. What I wanted to do was serve. And I know that there's a lot of people like me. There's a lot of immigrants who are like, I am given a chance to go to a country that has remarkable resources, has remarkable people, and all I want to do is say thank you with the rest of my life. And here I saw trauma making them question their existence here. And I'm like, that's not going to happen for these kids. The next nurse is questioning her own existence or his own existence. The next police officer, the next politician, the next educator is questioning whether we even want them here. And I was like, this is not the community you know, Pardeep. This is not what you grew up in. You grew up on the south side of Milwaukee. You grew up playing baseball as your first love before your first love, right? Like, you know better. You know that this terrorist should not represent all white people. But yet, they're so into their trauma that for them, they're scared of every white person that walks into the temple. Right? I was like, I'm worried. I'm worried. So we did our best to put a brave face on for the world. Went in front of every camera and said, you know what? We're going to be strong together. Our respective communities are going to be strong together. Whether, people that look alike, the people that don't look alike, people that look, walk, talk, dress, eat, pray the same, or if we don't. We're going to build this country, right? And we're not going to be defined by what happens to us, and just watch what we're going to do with this. Faith communities, churches, synagogues, masjids, you name it. You name it. And people have this is the beautiful part about a lot of this, is that I feel like people get together in the aftermath of that and say, you know what, we're not going to be defined by that, right? And that's the beautiful part. But inspiration without commitment, right, falls short sometimes. And over time, it was really difficult to keep that charge up, right? Because I knew kind of the optics of it. I know that there's kids at home, right? I have young men right now who identify with Timothy McVeigh. I have young men right now who will openly tell you, I sympathize with the Buffalo shooter. I want to commit a crime like this person over there. And they openly tell, and I ask them, I said, why? Why do you identify with the perpetrators of these horrific crimes? Because, Pardeep, they were so powerful. They were so courageous. They did what they wanted to do. They took charge. I asked them, is that power? Is that power to take 7 people's lives who were elderly and unarmed? That's power? Maybe influence. Maybe they were able to do with it. But is that power? Is that courage? And so I know at that time that there is somebody at home who is watching and saying, well, how is the community going to react? Are they going to be terrorized? And they're not just watching to see how the community that was impacted is going to respond. They're going to watch and say, how does the world respond? How do we respond? In faith? In courage? Right? Or do we go to this place where we're like, all I see is hate? In love? Or more hate? And over time, we were doing our best. But then at some point, and I don't know why I did what I did. I would love to say, like, I self-evaluate my decisions and reflect back, but there's just some times where you just got to give it to God. You just have to give it to God. And people are like, I don't know. I don't have I don't have all the answers. Thank you for the invite. I don't have all the answers. But I will tell you that when I'm in a place of being lost and in despair, I search for something that, maybe even just whispers. Maybe just whispers and says, hey, you know what? I'm not going to put you through anything that you can't handle. Every one of you, as much as I may hope that nothing bad ever happens, every one of you has gone through struggles. Every one of you has gone through difficulty and will go through difficulty. But God does not put us in a place where we can't handle what is happening. We may have to listen. And listen not to logic. Listen to something that seems unreasonable. And at that time, something spoke to me and said, there is this guy who belonged to the same gang that the shooter belonged to. And the shooter in our situation, his name was Wade Michael Page. He killed 7 people, including my father. I think what we have to do is we have to give him the dignity, I have to give him the dignity of saying his name. And I think media and other people, you all may have a different responsibility, right? Of whether you want to say his name or not. But I have to give him the dignity of saying his name. Because I know at one point, Wade Michael Page was the same little boy, little kid, right? That we were also teaching how to walk, how to talk, how to say mom, dad. Right? He was an ex-military. He came back to Littleton, Colorado, shortly before Columbine happened. Why I make it an effort to say his name, right, is because there are all kinds of ways that people get rejected. And there's a society full of rejection. This is amplified with social media. So if I continue to monster him and say, you know what, this is just a monster. He was just an evil man. Then what we do is we highlight that person, and then we don't address some of the societal things that we need to address, right? Because I know there's more Wade Michael Pages out there. There's more people out there who are looking for ways and how is the world going to reject me? Because I want fuel to feel rejected so I can reject them back. Right? I need it. There's some Arno, right, when we're about to talk about it, used to have a swastika on his middle finger. But there's no place that the good Lord's cross is back, so I can't point. So, I mean, it was basically to garner rejection and hatred so that he can whip them the middle finger back, right? And so he can get more of it. Because the human experience doesn't work in the way that if you don't give a lot of hate to some of these people, the human experience doesn't just produce it itself. We're meant to be very, very compassionate, empathetic beings. We go against the grain of humanity, which lots of people will say, the grain of humanity, what we are beasts of survival. No. If we look at ourselves, truly look at humanity, why we're here is because of cooperation. This is why we survive. And we're meant to connect. We're meant to connect because God gives us a challenge that says, you know what? You may not look like, talk like, walk like, dress like, eat like, pray like everybody else. But that was my challenge for you. That's my challenge for you to actualize as a human being so that you can get to a place, because it's easy for us to feel empathy for the people that do look like us, walk like us, talk like us, dress like us, eat like us, pray like us, whatever like us. But it's difficult for us to go past that and say, okay, I get you. I see what you're trying to do. You made it our challenge here. So we have to see the humanity in the Wade Michael Pages of the world. If we don't, that spirit of evil, he wasn't evil. He just wasn't close enough to God. Okay? He just wasn't close enough to that light, to that healing, to make himself, to embrace that. At some point, he lost track of who he was. So I reached out to Arno, and the first sort of like reaching out to Arno was, help me understand this. Why do people like you do this? Why would a person do this? The shooter in our situation, Paige, shot and killed himself. after he killed 7 people, after he got into that firefight with Lieutenant Brian Murphy. Lieutenant Brian Murphy took, I believe it was 15 shots from close range from Wade Page and was able to miraculously survive. So the explanation, and this also happens quite a bit too, the explanation was gone with the shooter. So the person that I thought could help me understand, because a lot of times before we can ever do the what, this is the way it is for me, before we can ever do the what, we need to understand the why. As for me, like reaching out to him was, hey bud, explain to me why white supremacists do these types of things. I kind of jokingly say, like, people are like, how did you two connect? I was like, well, on Tinder, we swiped right. That wasn't the case. And so I emailed him. We had mutual connections, and I emailed him. And after a while, we started texting. And then after some time, I was like, hey, man, like, I'm just at a low place. Can we meet out? And I was wrestling through kind of this fear of like, did he really change? Do people like this really change? Now, I would love to tell you that I'm going to look this handsome for the rest of my life, but I'm probably not. I'm going to change. I'll look more handsome later, but we navigate change, right? We navigate it, right? Sometimes I might use some Just for Men just to kind of, again, but we navigate change. So change is a constant. It's a truth, right? But here I am kind of discounting a person because he was openly racist to say, well, change is like a truth for all of us, but it may not be a truth for him. Once a racist, always a racist, right? And that's kind of like going through my mind. And so the first time I'm like, hey, like, where do you want to go eat? I'm judging, right? We're all capable of stereotypes. We're all capable of just kind of like I'm trying to figure this situation out too. Like, where do you want to go eat? And he's like, so he tells me he likes Thai food and he wants to go eat at this Thai restaurant. And, part of me was relieved. I took a deep sigh, deep breath. I'm like, okay, maybe he's not a racist. So my stereotype was, if he was a racist, I was like, white people cannot handle spicy food. So if he was still a white supremacist definitely would not be able to handle spicy food. So I was kind of relieved that he said a Thai joint, right? And so I'm going forward, and there was kind of like tests like that before I actually met him in person. Another thing that kind of happened before I met him was just kind of like there was a lot of life happening. There's a lot of life happening. Dad, mom was widowed. She was going through her own grief. My mother was able, as you saw in the video, she was able to survive by hiding in a closet. But it was very, very clear that she still heard those gunshots. She had just a lot of just sadness, but also hypervigilance of just scared. And so you can imagine once I told her of who I'm going to meet out, I'm not the easiest son to have either. So she was like, are you crazy? Right? Then I was like, I figured I should tell my wife too, just in case. So I'm like, and they're all like, you have lost your mind. You have lost your mind. And people, I think, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I have. Maybe I have, because each restaurant that I go into, each coffee shop that I go into, I sit down and I have a conversation with somebody, but I'm not even paying attention to what they're saying. Because I'm going through something, a survival mechanism of thinking about the next shooter coming in. So that's commonly known as disassociation. I had 2 kids at the time. One was being born soon. And those 2 kids, there was a lot of time where I just spent right next to their bed. I would fall asleep on the carpet right next to their bed because I felt like it was safe and good. And so my wife was like, you're spending a lot of time with the kids. You are hugging them a lot longer than, like, it's just like you're going through something. I'm like, yeah, like I just appreciate life. I appreciate, I appreciate being alive. We were 10 minutes away from the temple itself. The only reason I didn't have to think about saving my 4 and my 6-year-old was because my 6-year-old forgot a notebook at home and we turned back around. So we did not get to Sunday school on time. But that also kept us from hearing those gunshots. So there's this incredible guilt, incredible relief, like survivor's guilt, survivor's relief, all of these mixed emotions happening all at one time. And then I'm like, hey, dude, let's go, he was like, let's go meet at the Thai restaurant. I'm like, oh, okay, let's go do it. We get to the Thai restaurant, and that day, just kind of, it was a little bit colder, rainy. I've Googled Arnold at this time, and he's walking past me, and he's like probably like 6'2", 6'3". At that time, he was skinny. He's put on a little bit of weight now, but at that time, he had this hoodie that he liked to wear. So he's walking by me with this hoodie, and he kind of walks like this. If you guys meet Arnold, and I was just like, man. So I was like, he looks like, he's like a stereotypical white supremacist, right? Tattooed all up, walks, like he just, yeah. And so I'm parked. I don't think that he saw me because he didn't look over. Later on, he would say that he did see me, but wanted to give me space to come inside. And I was going to make the old excuse that like every parent makes, right? Like, hey, my kid got sick. And as soon as I started to kind of reach over and put the car into drive, I'm gonna text him and say, hey, you know what? Sorry, I couldn't make it. The kids got sick. There was something, and I felt this not physically felt this, but there was something that said to me, "You've come this far. Just take one step out of the car. Put the car back in park." And take a step out and trust that I have you. I'm not going to put anything in your life that you can't handle, and I got you. Let go of sight. Let it go. Walk in faith. So that push, felt it, walked out, walked into the restaurant. This thing, implicit biases, these things, right? We all have them. And I remember the first thing that I thought when I saw this person. And Arnold, it's kind of weird, like somebody was waiting for you at a restaurant, like right in the front door, like the double set of doors, and he's right in the front, and he was flanked by 2 Asian waitresses, like to the side, and he's in the middle. And they're like waiting at a restaurant for me that's busy. I'm like, this is so weird. So I walk up and I'm thinking in my head, my sort of bias was, right? I'm glad that he didn't eat the Asian waitresses, right? Now I'm being honest with you so that we can all know that we can be honest sometimes with our fear, with our reservations, with our feelings. Sometimes those types of thoughts they come to the surface. But that's what I was thinking. And what I was thinking was, over the week, people, mom, my wife, other people were like, dude, people like this don't change. Once a racist, always a racist. He's got it in him, right? He's going to kill you. He's going to whatever the worst was said to me. And as I walk up, and I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to say to him? He admitted that he was like, I didn't know what to say to you either. He was like, what am I going to reach out and say, hey, my name is Arnold, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the gang that I helped found in Wisconsin. I'm sorry for putting this into motion. I'm sorry for, what does he say? I was wrestling with the same thing. What answers did I want? Hey, it's like too really awkward, right? first conversation of like, what are we going to say to each other? And I walk inside, and reach out my hand. He reaches out his hand. We say, hey, how you doing? And he looks at me, and he's like, dude, what happened to your eye? And I was like, what did happen to my eye? In all of this chaos, I completely forgot what happened to my eye. I didn't even feel it anymore. I was just out of my body at this moment. But what happened to my eye was, and I started to explain this to him. I said, my daughter is getting a little bit older. My son's getting a little bit older. My daughter was getting self-conscious at that age, and she was getting to that place where you would give her a bath and you would like use soap. And she would be like, well, Dad, can you look away from me when you use soap and this and that? And I know that so I'm trying to respect my little queen. And then my wife will be like, see, you just put water on them and you didn't even use soap, did you? And they're still smelly. And so I'm trying to take care of both women in my house. I'm like, okay, I don't want my wife to be mad. I don't want my daughter to be mad. And this is where I find myself a lot of times. The three boys, simple. Simple. But yeah, they're a little bit more difficult. So that particular day, I have Jay and Amherst in the tub, and I'm soaping them down. And I'm looking away and looking back and looking away and looking back. And, I have this bathtub. And in this bathtub, right on the corner is a spring-loaded sort of like caddy, a shower caddy. And on this shower caddy, you have shampoo, this thing, that thing. But you also have this like loofah hook that comes off that people put their loofahs on, right? And my wife was like, we got to get rid of that loofah hook. It's too sharp. It's going to take somebody's eye out. Okay? I procrastinated, and I turned back around and go through this way and went down, and then all of a sudden, out of the corner, this loofah hook goes right through the bottom of my eyelid and comes out of the top. Just getting a little piece of my eyeball. And so I'm like, oh no, I messed up. Right? That there's always that sinking feeling like I really messed up this time. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? Because I can't just yank my eye out of it. So I'm like, okay, then I take both sides of the spring loaded, and I squeeze them together, and I go like this, and then my daughter is just screaming, and she's like, and so she's trying to help Dad, and she starts to pull on the whole thing, and then I'm like, no, give it back to and she's pulling, and I'm pulling back, and I'm just like, baby girl, like, Jay, go get dressed. And so I know we're gonna have to run to the I'm like, we have to. There's sort of a walk-in clinic that was about a couple blocks away, and so and the way that I got it out was the way that anybody would get it out. It's the same way we went in. So I just pull the hook out, and all of a sudden I look down, and there's blood all over the place. And I guess it's just sorry for those that are just ate, and everybody. Hopefully nobody had meatball marinara. So it's just coming out. And I'm looking down, and they're going to get dressed. Eventually, we go to the walk-in clinic, and I'm calling my wife, and I'm like, hey, remember that loofah hook that you told me not to, you told me to get out of there? Yeah. It got to me before I got to it. We get to the walk-in clinic. They see me coming in, and they're like, they just yell. And it's like pretty far away. They're like, they just saw it. They're like, saw the blood. Like, no. We don't take that here. We don't take that here. And I was like, what? This is an urgent walk-in clinic. You gotta help me. They're like, no. We're not taking it. And so anyways, she's driving home by this time, and she drives over to the walk, and she's like, get in the car. And she's like, they're not gonna take this here. So finally we get to Freighter. Doc is like, by the time we got there, it was just swollen shut. And eventually he looks through and he's like, Pardeep, you must be the luckiest person, right? I'm like, word, Doc, how lucky am I? Tell me how lucky I am. And he's like, if it was over just a little bit, you would have a glass eye. But it just got the white of your eye, and it came out the other side. It lacerated the muscle that allows you to blink. You all know, bless you. Do you all know that we have a blinky muscle in our eyelid? An actual muscle, you know that. So we have an actual muscle that helps you blink. I lacerated that. So when I met Arnold for the first time, I used to wear like tape like this and keep my eye up. Now you can imagine if you put tape to keep your eye up, it gets awfully dry. So I would be walking around town in Milwaukee going like this. Blinking with my, just blinking, right? And that whole sort of what happened there inspired that discussion around that. And here I saw somebody, the same thing, like, so how many of us right now met for the first time tonight? Like we kind of, like now that we know each other, this is our first meeting together. No? We've all met before? Oh yeah? Okay. So usually I get a different response, but what I saw was the same thing that I see over and over again, which is why I say that a lot of times within our experience, we are wired to empathize, to care. We're not wired the other way. And I saw this person who later on people would describe as a psychopath. I've actually had people come up to me and like, hey, dude, yeah, there's white supremacists out there, but that dude is nuts. And here's what he did. And I'm like, yeah, that dude right there, that's nuts, is like my children's uncle, is sometimes our babysitter. I know his entire family, right? He's my brother. That person right there. So when we talk about redemption and redeemability, there's not anyone that is not redeemable. I cold-heartedly believe this. I fundamentally believe this. So no matter who I work with, they can be pathologized in all kinds of different ways. But what I try to do with them is have them exercise this part of themselves that empathizes and cares and wants to care, and how that, maybe even that feeling has been perverted for them. But when I met Arno and I saw him kind of like, oh, I even thought to myself, I'm like, man, we met for the first time today in person. Yeah, we've texted, we've emailed, he knows my story, but this is us meeting for the first time. Two grown men, and we're sitting here caring for each other. And that started a longer conversation. And those longer conversations have led to 12 years of this work, and we're doing this work together. But for me, it led me back to a place where I found a sense of myself. I found a sense of who I was meant to be, and that's not to say that God ever puts anything into your life, again, that's going to harm you or hurt you. But one of my favorite stories, and this is going to be a sick talking about Jesus Christ. So forgive me for forgetting some of this and the details, but my sort of awe and inspiration, when he is crucified. When he is crucified, and as he's being crucified, somebody basically says to him, if you're the Son of Man, if you're the Son of Man, free yourself, show us, prove to us. And a lot of times, with our rational mind, right, with our sight, we would say, well, freedom would be what? What, he's going to break those chains? He's going to just become Superman? But Christ, in his own sort of, even as we think about Christ, I think about Christ both as God, right, and as man. But a lot of times I see a lot again, forgive me for this, but I see a lot of Christians focus on the way Christ is God, but forget the way that he was man. And forget about the weak and the meek and how much he must have been struggling and how betrayed he felt with those humanly sort of emotions that we all have, right? How betrayed he felt because he is going out there doing what he wanted a lot of other people to do, what he hoped to inspire other people to do, only to feel like we're not doing it. We're allowing, we're saying, you know what, we worship you, you do it, we will be in awe of that, but somehow, some way, we can't do it. We're not going to do it. And when I think about kind of the lesson of that last, as he is, and my youngest son goes to a private school, and so he just sometimes puts on YouTube videos of Christ, and he's kind of like, he's surprised when I know certain things. I'm like, I was the director of the Interfaith Conference. I have been in my share of churches, all right, synagogues, masjids, and mandars, gurdwaras. So Dad knows a little bit, but I'm like, so I asked him, like, what's like, what were his, like, kind of some of his final words that you remember? And he's like, Dad, I like him, asking, like, he's like, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I was like, yeah, like, you remember that. You remember those words. And what do you think is courage? What do you think is strength? And he's like, him forgiving people for crucifying him. I was like, and that's strength to you, forgiveness. Yeah, that is, because he could have felt rage, and he could have felt hatred, and he could have felt like, you know what, I've done all this, and here you are tearing apart my garments, right? Here you are tearing each other apart, right? The physical garment being the way the world is divided today, and we are just tearing each other apart. And could we not feel personally betrayed by that? We could. We could, and we could get upset, and we could be enraged, or we could look back and say, you know what, somehow, some way, and freedom sometimes is not just the freedom that we think about from our logical mind, but freedom can be a sense of salvation, a sense of finding ourselves, a sense of when we were 2 years old and now we're older, how do we rediscover that? Because life has happened to all of us over time. But for me, Christ, almost in a really healthy, vengeful place, looks over and says, like, when challenged, you're the Son of Man, free yourself. Christ is almost like, watch me. Watch me. Right? And now it becomes our turn. Right? It becomes our turn to marvel in awe, to be inspired, to worship, to surrender what we can't control and give it to God through Christ. Right? But let's not also forget the other part where Christ says, walk this earth like me as well. Right? Let's not surrender it all to praise and worship and awe. Let's also walk that walk. Right? Let's remember the part of us that can feel betrayed and can feel hurt and can feel like the world is happening to us. Right? But know that when we're in touch, when we're connected, when we see the humanity in each other, The world doesn't happen to us, it happens through us. Right? All of it. All of it. And so I want to thank you. I know we got to take some questions. I don't know what time it is. I got into the sermon a little bit. Forgive me. But we'll take some questions if you have some questions. And no question is a bad question. Honestly, if there's something that's playing on your heart, like it's like, just go ahead and ask it. I'm gonna grab this coffee while you think of something. If you want to be like, Pardeep, what color are your socks? I don't know. It's all good.
I just asked, what time is it? 7:35. So,
7:35.
one question. Who gets it? Mary.
You got a brave. Mary.
About a year and a half ago, I was flipping through the channels and I happened to see a program out of public television in Milwaukee, and it was on the 10th anniversary of the shooting in Oak Creek. And I heard you speaking so eloquently, and it blew me away. And I heard the Chardi Kala. Would you share that with us tonight?
Sure. Well, that's a great question and a great reminder. So Chardi Kala is part of a bigger phrase, but Chardi Kala stands for relentless optimism. And the bigger phrase is this, and I'll share that with you because I think it is very, very important. So whenever a Sikh goes into a Gurdwara, a temple, a Sikh temple, there's always going to be 4 doors at any Gurdwara in the world. They have to have 4 doors. And what that basically means is they have to have a door to the north, the south, the east, and the west. They can have more than 4 doors, but they have to have those 4 doors in those 4 directions to symbolize that everyone is welcomed. A Sikh is a learner, a Gurdwara is kind of a school, educational center. Before anybody leaves, so we gather as what's known as a Sangat. We kind of meditate, pray together. And before every like service lets out, they say this phrase, and I never really understood it because I was kind of like, I had a confrontational relationship with the religion and God and spirit, like all of that. So there was just this recitation of this, and what the recitation is, Nanak Naam Chardi Kala Tere Bane Sarbat Tapala, which literally translates to, in God's name, we shall be relentlessly optimistic and fight for the peace and prosperity of all mankind. And I just wondered, I'm like, why didn't they say Sikhs, right? Why didn't they say Muslims? Why didn't they, at that time, Buddhists were big in India. Why didn't they say Hindu? Why didn't they say Christian? Why didn't they say Jews? But deliberately saying, you have prayed, you have come, you have gathered, we have gotten this experience together, but I leave you with the charge of, now go fight. Go fight in a good, healthy way for the peace and prosperity of all mankind. Right? So that's relentless optimism, and like kind of conceptualized in the phrase. But you brought up another point, like the 10th anniversary. My daughter that's going to UW Milwaukee, she was 6 at the time, she's 18 now. She was 16 during the anniversary. And she comes up to me and she's like, Dad, I want to say a spoken word at the 10th anniversary. We had thousands and thousands of people coming to town. Right? This was 4 days of programming. Each day, at least 1,000 people there. And so, everybody's there, the governor's there, everybody's there, everybody wants speaking time, right? So she's like, I want to say this spoken word. I'm like, okay. And she's like, it's going to be directed towards the shooter. And I'm like, okay. All right. And as a father, you feel like sometimes it's like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I hope I'm doing the right thing, right? But you have to trust. And she gets up there and she delivers this incredible spoken word. And she directly kind of like at the shooter or anybody hurting, right? And she says, you didn't hate us. You hated yourself. And like at that moment, I felt that as a father, as like I was still hearing those voices of those kids saying, why us? They don't want us here. And I felt like if she got it, then they all got it. And I felt that the next generation, right, was good to go. And so I have trust that the next generation will pick up in the goodness that we left it off on, and that the world will be in a good place. They have incredible responsibilities that they have to take on, right? And I think that what we have to do is we have to usher as much goodness as we can so that they have the right heart to do that work. But that's what that phrase means.
Thank you. Through this whole series, I just have been really, the word love, it was like this when we were forming the series. I would love over hate, and that love has just been generated through all of these conversations, all of these Wednesday nights. So we thank you for your sharing, and I'm sure Pardeep is willing to answer a few questions up front if you want to come up. So
Sure.
Thanks again. Go in peace.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Sure.
By the way, I think you said to me when I sneezed,